For too long, super empaths, souls with the rare ability to feel and perceive more deeply than anyone else, have lived in silence within toxic relationships. They didn't just sense others' pain, they unconsciously carried it, believing their love and compassion were enough to save the lost. They were torches carrying light into the darkness, yet they forgot that even light needs protection from hands that seek to possess it. In the psychological world of the narcissist, every relationship revolves around power. They do not love in the true sense of the word, they possess. Everyone who enters their life must play a role, the admirer, the obedient follower, or the emotional supplier who sustains the grand image they've built of themselves. And the super empath, with their open heart and profound sensitivity, becomes the perfect target. At first, the connection feels magical. The narcissist is captivated by the light, understanding and selflessness of the super empath, because within that light they see what they themselves lack. But gradually, the empath's love becomes a tool. Every gesture of kindness, every attempt to heal, is twisted into proof that feeds the narcissist's inflated ego. As Carl Jung wrote, "The less secure the ego, the more it demands to be worshipped." The narcissist is a living embodiment of that truth. Yet no flame can burn forever without realizing it's being consumed. The super empath begins to feel drained. Something is off. They give endlessly, yet receive nothing in return. They listen, yet are never heard. A vast emptiness begins to form, not between two people, but within themselves. And one day, truth rises, not loudly, but with the quiet certainty of sunrise. They realize, I'm not healing anyone, I'm being depleted. And in that moment, they begin to withdraw their energy. Not by disappearing, but by ceasing to react. That is the moment of transmutation, when the once drained soul becomes a self-sustaining source of light, when compassion evolves into discernment, when love no longer means submission but spiritual freedom. In this video, we will explore the hidden power of the super empath, a power that doesn't come from anger, but from awakening. We'll witness what happens when they strike back, not with words, but with energy. And more importantly, we'll learn how to protect our souls, so that kindness no longer becomes an open door for darkness to enter, but a lamp that guides us home to our true sovereignty. Because sometimes the highest form of resistance isn't to fight, it's to stand still in your own light. The calm before the storm, when the super empath steps out of the ego's shadow. In today's world, where noise is mistaken for proof of life, super empaths are the rare souls who know that true strength lies in silence. But to reach that silence, they must first walk through their own hell, manipulative relationships, emotional whirlwinds, and the illusion called redemptive love. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Super empaths, because of their deep sensitivity, are often pulled into the darkness of others before they ever learn to face their own. They see the wound in the narcissist and believe they can heal it. They hear the cry behind the coldness and think that if they love long enough, deep enough, the other person will change. But that is the most dangerous illusion, what Jung called projection, the act of casting one's own inner savior onto another. The super empath isn't just loving a person, they are loving the potential of who they imagine that person could become. What they don't realize is that they're being driven by their own shadow, the part that needs to be needed, that wants to prove that love can conquer darkness, and that very shadow keeps them trapped far longer than necessary. But eventually reality stops allowing self-deception. The storm arrives not from outside, but from within. The tension between intuition, knowing this is wrong, and heart, wanting to believe it can still be saved, becomes unbearable. Jung called this the Rubedo, the black stage of spiritual transformation, where the soul is crushed between light and darkness in order to be reborn. And then the super empath awakens. They realize sometimes the highest form of love is not staying to heal someone, but leaving so they must face themselves. When they withdraw their energy, the narcissist begins to collapse. The empath's silence is no longer submission, it's the final verdict of an awakened soul. The manipulator must now confront the void once filled by another's emotional reactions. In Jungian terms, this is the fall of the persona, the shattering of the false mask that no longer has a mirror to reflect it. Once free from the cycle of control, the super empath is no longer the same. They learn to set boundaries without guilt. To understand the true compassion must walk hand in hand with clarity. Jung wrote, "It is a mistake to think that goodness is the opposite of evil. Wholeness appears only when we embrace both." Now, the super empath understands, to love is no longer to endure, it is to choose. Consciously, in reality, they become calmer, less reactive. When attacked, they no longer feel the need to justify themselves. When misunderstood, they simply smile. When slandered, they do not retaliate. They've come to understand the nature of the game, that every provocation is nothing but a desperate attempt to regain control. And by refusing to react, they reclaim their freedom. The silence of the super empath is not weakness. It is the evidence of individuation, the process Jung described as the birth of one's true self, when a person no longer lives to be loved, but lives to become who they truly are. How? A narcissist reacts when the false self meets the truth. Carl Jung once wrote, "The ego cannot tolerate the truth about itself. It needs illusion in order to survive." That is the central tragedy of every narcissist. They do not live in reality. They live in a version of reality they can control. They construct a world in which they are always right, always adored, always the center of attention. And when a super empath, who once served as their perfect mirror, withdraws, that world begins to crack. They don't just lose a person, they lose the reflection that kept their false self alive. The first stage is the narcissistic injury. To the narcissist, the super empath was a safe supply, endlessly patient, forgiving, and always there when needed. When that person suddenly stops responding, refuses to submit, or simply chooses silence, the narcissist feels as though they've been slapped across the face. They can't comprehend what's happening. In their world, only they have the right to leave. The empath's stillness destroys the script. Their inflated ego interprets this as a grave insult, not to love, but to power. They wonder, how dare she do that? How can he stay silent when I speak? Jung called this an invasion of the persona, the disruption of the mask that convinces them they are admirable. Once that mask slips, the shadow begins to rise. After the shock comes panic. They reach for their usual weapons, guilt, pity, fear, but none of them work. The super empath no longer reacts. The narcissist ego, once fed by another's emotional energy, now faces a wall of absolute silence, and nothing terrifies them more. They've lived off echoes. And when the echo fades, they feel as if they no longer exist. This is the beginning of the narcissistic collapse. The first reaction is narcissistic rage. They attack with words. You're ungrateful. No one will ever love you like I did, or you'll regret this. This fury doesn't come from strength, but from terror, the fear of exposure. They try to inflict pain just to feel powerful again. Jung explained that the ego's anger is a desperate attempt to mask its fear of dissolution when reality no longer bends to its will. Narcissists create chaos because in chaos they are still the center. If the empath reacts, they feel alive, even in rage. When anger fails, they shift to emotional manipulation, the second stage, the resurrection of power. They morph into victims. I was wrong. I was just scared of losing you. You don't understand. I'm hurting too. Or I can't live without you. This isn't love. It's the death throes of a collapsing ego. By playing the weak one, they try to awaken pity, the very Achilles heel of the super empath. But now the empath sees through it. They no longer cry out of compassion. They feel sorrow for the other's dependence. And when this performance fails, the narcissist spirals deeper into panic. Next comes reputation manipulation. Unable to control you directly, they try to control you through others. They spread half-truths, distort stories, and paint you as cruel or heartless. They must maintain a flawless image because their persona cannot survive exposure. This is what Jung called protecting illusion through shadow, when the ego uses deceit as a shield against truth. The narcissist fears truth because truth would force them to confront the inner void, a place filled only with shame and fear. The more sophisticated ones will try a different tactic, the redemption act. They suddenly appear virtuous, helping others, posting philosophical quotes, even speaking about healing and growth. But make no mistake, this is merely a new persona rising from the ashes of the old. Jung warned, when the shadow is suppressed for too long, it returns in the guise of false religiosity. The narcissist hasn't changed, they only rebranded, hoping you'll believe they've evolved. If you return, the cycle restarts, only subtler. Finally comes the smear and punishment stage. When every attempt fails, they turn to destruction. They spread rumors, try to tarnish your reputation or feign indifference while secretly tracking your every move. They want to prove you no longer matter, yet everything they do betrays the opposite. They are obsessed with eliciting a reaction. They need you angry, defensive, or in pain, because only then do they feel they still exist in you. Jung called this enantiodromia, when the extreme of control turns into the extreme of fear. The love they once preached becomes domination, domination becomes panic, and panic ultimately exposes their rawest fragility. Beneath the fury lies a shattered soul, one desperate to be seen, to be loved, yet too proud to admit it needs love at all. In the next stage, the replacement phase, the narcissist rushes to find a new supply. They must fill the void immediately. They post happy pictures, flaunt passionate love, and declare that they've moved on. But this isn't love, it's a ritual of ego resurrection. The new person is merely a temporary sedative to numb the shame. Jung once wrote, "No one can escape their shadow by changing the one who mirrors it." Yet the narcissist tries and fails, because every new relationship simply repeats the same tragedy with different faces. When the new illusion begins to crack, because no one can maintain a persona forever, they start to compare. She's not as deep as you. He doesn't understand me the way you did. This regret doesn't come from genuine love, but from the loss of the sense of power they once had. The super empath, by withdrawing, has taken away what they valued most, control, and that is a wound they never recover from. The ego crisis deepens into paranoia. They begin to believe you're talking about them, plotting something, or that you haven't moved on. In truth, they're the ones obsessed. They stalk your social media, question mutual friends, create fake accounts to watch how you're living. They need proof that you still think of them, because if you've truly forgotten, they would have to face the symbolic death of their... Jung called this the dark night of the ego. It's the phase where the persona collapses, the shadow rises, and there is no longer any wall between the conscious and the unconscious. Most narcissists cannot endure this stage, for it requires humility and confrontation with truth, two things they've avoided their entire lives. They will run into work, alcohol, sex, religion, or a new role to play, but wherever they go, the darkness follows. Meanwhile, the super empath, once deeply wounded, now understands. They take no pleasure in the narcissist's collapse because they know that the death of the ego is an initiation everyone must face. They simply know that this time they will not return. When the narcissist accuses, they don't react. When the narcissist weeps, they don't soften. When the narcissist provokes, they simply look without contempt, without pity, but with the gaze of one who has awakened. This is no longer my story. This is the moment of union between light and shadow that Jung spoke of, when the super empath is no longer the naive brightness of unexamined kindness, but has absorbed the lessons of darkness, discernment, boundaries, and sovereignty. Their compassion is no longer innocent. It has become living wisdom. They understand that sometimes true love is not staying to save someone, but leaving so as not to enable their darkness any longer. The narcissist sees this and fears it. They fear it because in the end, the power they thought they had was an illusion. When the super empath stops reflecting, the illusion dissolves, leaving only the emptiness they've been running from all their lives. And that is the deepest punishment, being left alone with oneself. No one can save them because what they need is not love, but confrontation. In reality, this is where the game ends. The super empath no longer needs to prove who was right or wrong, no longer needs to explain their story to anyone. They simply walk away, quietly, decisively, not out of hatred, but because they have chosen truth over illusion. The narcissist remains behind, in the dark room of a decaying ego, trying to glue together the shattered mirror. But every fragment only reflects another distorted version of themselves. And, as Jung concluded, the awakening of consciousness is the death of illusion. When the super empath awakens, the narcissist's illusion dies. Yet within that death lies a possibility. If they are brave enough to face their shadow, they could begin the true journey. But most will not. They will continue seeking new mirrors, new people to reflect the image they wish to believe in, and the cycle will repeat until someone else chooses silence, withdraws energy, and forces them once again to face the truth. But that is no longer the super empath story. They have moved on, not away from someone, but away from their former self, the one who once believed that kindness could save darkness. Now they understand that light is only powerful when it knows its boundaries, and in that silence a chapter closes. There is no noise, no hatred, only the peace of one who has returned to their true essence. Behind them remains the narcissist, still searching for their reflection in the eyes of others, never realizing that what they fear most is not being forgotten, but being truly seen. Or making of the soul. In ancient mysticism, alchemists were never truly trying to turn lead into gold. They were describing an inner process, the magnum opus, the great work of the soul. Carl Jung, in his study of alchemical symbolism, recognized that each stage of alchemy mirrors a psychological transformation, the evolution of human consciousness. And within the relationship between the super empath and the narcissist, this entire cycle unfolds vividly, painfully, yet precisely. Jung called the beginning of this journey Rubedo, the blackening, the dark phase. It is when all illusions are burned away, when every mask is scorched, when the soul stands face to face with its own dense shadow. For the super empath, Rubedo begins at the moment they realize their love cannot save the narcissist. They once believed that if they were good enough, patient enough, loving enough, the other would change. But then they understand, no amount of light can illuminate a soul that insists on keeping the door closed. That moment of realization is the great collapse, the death of the savior illusion. And for the narcissist, Rubedo is the collapse of the persona, the golden mask they once believed was their true identity. When the super empath withdraws, the mirror vanishes and the false self ignites. That is when panic sets in. They scramble to restore their image, but the more they struggle, the deeper they sink into the darkness. This is the black phase of their soul, where everything that once defined I begins to dissolve. They fall into a loop of fear, shame, blame, and back to fear again. And in that chaos, Jung said, the soul begins its true work. After Rubedo comes albedo, the whitening, the stage of purification. This is when the super empath begins to rise from the ashes, reclaiming their authentic light. But this light is not naive or radiant in innocence. It is light that has passed through fire. They learn discernment, that compassion does not mean self-sacrifice, and that to love does not mean to enable. In their silence, something extraordinary occurs. They begin to feel peace, even as the world around them remains chaotic. In that stillness, the soul is whitened, not by miracle, but by awareness. While the super empath moves through albedo, the narcissist remains trapped in Rubedo. They refuse the lesson. They keep constructing new personae, seeking new supplies, reenacting the same old play. Yet, each time the mask grows thinner, more fragile. Jung wrote, "What is not made conscious will repeat itself, and that is the fate of the soul that refuses to face its own shadow. To repeat suffering until it no longer has the strength to repeat." When the super empath transcends albedo, they enter citrinitas, the phase of illumination and expanded consciousness. Here they finally understand the role the narcissist played in their journey. He did not come to destroy me, but to expose the wounds I never dared to face. That realization marks true spiritual maturity. The super empath stop seeing themselves as a victim. They look back on years of manipulation and pain, but instead of resentment, they see initiation, the sacred rite of transformation. They understand that only by walking through hell can one recognize what real light is. As for the narcissist, they too have a chance to reach citrinitas, but very rarely, because the prerequisite is humility. Jung said, "Nothing awakens consciousness faster than pain, yet nothing makes a man run faster from it." They would have to face themselves without blame, to admit that the persona they've defended all their lives is only paint, while the true soul beneath it has withered. But most narcissists stop at the threshold. They prefer to rebuild the illusion rather than face the darkness, and so their souls never truly ripen. Finally, the super empath's journey reaches Rubedo, the reddening, the golden stage of rebirth. This is when they integrate both poles, light and shadow, pain and wisdom, compassion and boundary. Jung called this the birth of the self, the emergence of the authentic being beyond the old ego. The super empath is no longer the healer of others, but the witness of their own being. They understand that true love is not salvation. It is the capacity to see one another without trying to change each other. Rubedo is the stage where the soul turns red gold, like pure gold tempered long enough in the fire. Here, the super empath no longer hates the narcissist, nor idealizes themselves. They simply see the universal law at work. No one steps into the light without having first burned in the dark. They recognize that their silence is the crystallization of every past breakdown. It is no longer resistance, it is rebirth. And if we observe the entire process from afar, we see that both, the narcissist and the super empath, are two poles within the same alchemical cycle. The super empath represents the energy of consciousness, light, sensitivity, compassion. The narcissist represents the energy of the unconscious, shadow, desire, domination. When these two collide, energy explodes, painful, chaotic, but it opens the doorway to spiritual rebirth. Jung said that every meaningful encounter is destined because it propels the process of individuation, the soul's becoming whole. Thus, when seen through awakened eyes, the narcissist is no longer the enemy but the gatekeeper of the underworld, the final test of compassion, the place where the soul learns to love without losing itself. They are the necessary chemical reaction that separates gold from lead, that helps us discern what light is real and what is illusion. And only by leaving do we realize every wound that bled was a furnace, and we ourselves are the alchemists of the soul. So when the super empath becomes silent, it is no longer defense, it is the completion of the great work. That silence crystallizes from the awareness, I no longer need anyone to reflect my light back to me. And in that moment, the narcissist collapses, while the super empath is reborn. One dissolves in illusion, the other emerges as pure gold, unafraid of darkness, knowing it is only raw material not yet refined. Carl Jung once wrote, "In each of us lies a base metal that must be transformed, and the fire of life is the crucible in which the change takes place." The super empath has passed through that fire, burned, bent, seared, yet not turned to ash. They burned to become bright. They lost to become whole. They died as the old self, to be reborn as a free soul. That is Rubedo, the crimson dawn of the sovereign soul. And from here, their journey is no longer about the narcissist. It is about the return of light, after finally knowing who the darkness was. In the end, the journey between the super empath and the narcissist was never merely the story of two people. It was the story of illusion versus truth, of the false self against the authentic soul yearning to live. In Jungian light, it is a cosmic rite, where two forces, light and shadow, collide, dissolve, and are reborn into a greater whole. When all the reactions settle, when every power game fades, what remains is not victory or defeat, but understanding. The super empath realizes that love cannot save anyone who does not wish to be saved. And the narcissist, though unaware, has begun to confront the very part they feared most, the emptiness of a soul that has never known true love. Jung once said, "What we do not make conscious will control our lives, and we will call it fate." But the super empath has broken that fate. They are no longer driven by the need for validation, nor haunted by the fear of abandonment. They have passed through Rubedo, the blackness of despair, through albedo, the purification of awareness, and arrived at Rubedo, where the soul shines in wholeness. They are no longer a mirror for anyone else. They have become the golden mirror of their own being, luminous, still, and unwarped by need or illusion. The narcissist looks into it, and for the first time in their life, they see not the painted mask they once adored, but their true reflection, small, fragile, unformed. And they are terrified. Yet for the super empath, that moment is no tragedy, but a revelation. Light does not need to defeat darkness. It only needs to exist. For when light stands long enough, darkness has nowhere left to hide. When truth stands still, every lie dissolves. When the super empath chooses silence, not out of fear, but out of understanding, the universe itself shifts its frequency around them. Their silence becomes the language of freedom. Their departure becomes the rite of rebirth. And their peace, after all the destruction, becomes the certificate of a soul transmuted into gold.